So I mostly just listen to left-wing people because it reinforces my preconceived notions, and that feels good, and it feels good knowing that I'm right and knowing how smart I am. But sometimes I do supplement all this perfect information with what other people are listening to, specifically the 40% of Americans who love Trump. Most of them own guns, they live in rural America, and they have a totally different understanding of how the world works. And so even if I think that most of the things that they believe are totally irrational, it's good to hear from the other side. And sometimes you learn from them, and even if you don't learn from them, you learn how the crazy irrational ideas that are spewing from that sector of society got there and what the intellectual bedrock for that is. So one issue that the right-wing media likes talking about, maybe more than any other issue, is immigration. And they'll say, look, like these leftists, they have no idea what's happening in the real world. They have their heads in the sand, and they're just not able to acknowledge the facts which are right in front of their face. And the facts don't care about your feelings. And the facts are that these people were raised in different countries with different cultures, with different values. They weren't taught to value hard work in the same way as Americans were. They don't have the same entrepreneurial spirits. They've made their own countries poorer, and they're trying to make our country dirtier and poorer also. That's what Tucker Carlson will tell you. And not only that, but they're violent criminals. They're rapists. They're murderers. A certain someone coming down a golden escalator once said. We just can't have it. Some of them might be good people, but in general, they are trying to ruin our country just like they ruined theirs. And that's because they're criminals and they're violent. And so if those are the facts, you can't argue with the facts. You should follow the truth wherever it leads you, no matter how uncomfortable the conclusion might be. But it's interesting because when I hear those claims made, I rarely hear them reinforced with facts or statistics on immigration trends or data on crime rates or anything of that nature. Usually what they're reinforced with is a random moralizing anecdote and then a kind of regression back to the fundamental assumption in terms of course, everybody acknowledges that everybody knows that immigrants are more violent. Have you watched CSI Miami? Have you ever listened to the Rush Limbaugh show? This is the Sean Hannity show, but if you ever listen to the Rush Limbaugh show or watch the Tucker Carlson show or listen to our commander-in-chief, he's a tough talker. And everybody knows this. The only people that aren't accepting this are the liberals with their heads in the stand because they want to think that the world is made of sunshine and rainbows and candy and there's no violence anywhere. But we know that there's drug cartels in Mexico, and looky here, this person was just attacked by an immigrant, and we're going to tell you in excruciating detail every bit of the horrific event, which we'll use to generalize to an entire population of tens of millions of people. And so that's a strategy that could be done with anything or on any one or any subset of the population. And so if you're a particularly charismatic, anti-Semitic German in the 1920s with a small mustache, you could pluck data from any population you want. Let's call them Jewish people. And you could say, look at this Jewish person. He committed bank fraud, or he is a greedy person, or he is a murderer. And it's easy to do because there are hundreds of thousands or millions or tens of millions of Jews that you could choose from. And we know that if you have a subset of any population with hundreds of thousands or millions or tens of millions of people, you could pick out violent elements of within those populations, or you could pick out rapists, you could pick out murderers, you could pick out people who committed tax fraud, you could pick out anything that you want, and then you could use that to push the narrative that this just shows that the broader trend carries across the entire population. And so whether it's a city with 100,000 people, think you live in a city with 100,000 people, and the most violent crime that ever happens there is now used to say, look, people from Eugene are like this, or people from Nashville, Tennessee are like this, or if the population is big enough, look at what people from Texas do. This guy freaking had a chainsaw and massacred people. I don't know if he actually did that, but I bet you somebody's cut up somebody with a chainsaw in Texas once. Does that mean that it's a Texas thing? Not so much. And so if you want to actually understand if it's a trend among the entire demographic, what you have to do is what everybody knows you have to do, but they refuse to do because it undermines the narrative oftentimes, because a lot of times these are stereotypes that are pushed forward for political reasons because it allows us to otherize and it allows us to push certain policies that keep certain people in power. And so what is the actual facts about crime and immigration? They're actually very simple. They've been repeated over and over again. They're pretty widely accepted across the literature. Immigrants commit less crime, illegal immigrants commit less crime than the rest of the population. They commit less murders, they commit less rapes, they commit less crimes of all types. They also, the higher the percentage of immigrants in a certain population, the lower the crime rate. And so I wouldn't have guessed that, I wouldn't have known that for sure out of the blue. This is why you have to actually look at the data. It's possible that, people coming from impoverished countries, they're going to be in higher rates of poverty. Maybe they would commit higher crime rates. It's also possible that these people, are seeking a better life. And so in that way, have more of the American ideal of working hard in order to make something than a lot of Americans themselves do, which are born with silver spoons in their mouth. And, they're also aware that if they commit a crime, they could be deported right away. And so that would all be under threat. And so therefore they would commit lower crimes. You don't know which trend it's going to be just from spitting it out of your head about whichever narrative benefits your political party. This is why you look at the data. Turns out they commit less crimes. And that's just how it is. That's not going to stop certain demagogues from plucking out individual violent crimes committed by undocumented immigrants and then using the horrific details of those crimes to inflame tensions and further stereotypes among his gun-toting, rural, heavily propagandized base of supporters who mostly have not ever met undocumented immigrants and certainly haven't met violent undocumented immigrants, but still think that they're all around us and that their entry into the country is the fundamental reason why America is crumbling and the most daunting task that needs to be confronted. And thank God this one guy is speaking the truth about it. And look, he has evidence. It's this one person that died in San Francisco at the hands of an undocumented immigrant. And he said it before. He said they're murderers, and now look, they murdered. Case closed. It's totally irrational. It's the lowest form of race baiting. Maybe not the lowest, but it's a typical form of race baiting, and I think you stop.